A perspective on what has happened so far today. My colleague Thulasizwe Simelane joins us now from Parktown. Thulas, good afternoon to you. So today, very predictable, very procedural today, but I'm sensing that we are starting at the get-go to get a real sense of gravitas here. The Commission saying the Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo is an opportunity for all of us in the country to find a solution to corruption and state capture.
Yeah, Jeremy, I would have to agree with your sentiment. I mean, you also see what's really at stake here when you look at the people that are represented by senior legal representation. It shows you what the stakes are. Each and every player and every possible person that may possibly be implicated, understanding the gravity of what's likely to come out of the hearings in the coming weeks and months. And so the stakes are really high, and we saw the teams being introduced of the people that will be that have legal representation, and that for me told the story. I mean, former President Jacob Zuma being represented by advocate Moses Kakane, you have Ajay Gupta being represented as well, and you have possibly Duduzane Zuma being represented by an advocate. At this particular point, the instructions according to that advocate are still being finalized, but that's likely to come. Then it comes to the question of cross-examination. Already the indications are very clear that the various players who are likely to be implicated will be applying at various points to cross-examine witnesses when they come up and implicate them in these allegations of corruption and state capture. I'm joined by my colleague Aaron Bates, who's also been watching this particular process. It's really been about the processes and procedures and rules of engagement on day one, Aaron, but to say it was dull would be inaccurate, wouldn't it? I mean, we saw the cast of characters taking shape, but it says to me we are likely to be here for a very long time, Aaron.
There's a long road ahead. You're more generous than I am. I found today quite dull, but no less important, because we're setting up the legislative framework for what this inquiry will probe. What sort of acts of law are going to frame the work ahead. Of course, the terms of reference as well, which were published in the Government Gazette, as well as the regulations for the inquiry, and also the rules for journalists like you and I, including our dress code, and then also the rules for proceedings before the inquiry. But not only that, we had Advocate Thandi Norman, Senior Counsel, going through the shopping list, really, of reports that are before the Commission already. Her saying there are 122 boxes of paperwork already before the Commission, and more to come.
Yeah, in fact, as you say, that 122 boxes of documents that they're saying they have. This in addition to the Public Protector's report, which really forms what they called the guideline documents in terms of the establishment and the procedures of this and what this commission is all about. But then immediately after that you had Advocate Peters, I think it is Pretorius, saying that actually there could be more that is coming. We're just talking about this particular phase. Begs the question then, Aaron, this has been investigated as has been pointed this commission by Thuli Madonsela, the former public protector. Parliament has had inquiries. There's been inquiries by civil society, inquiries by the various departments that have investigated. How different is this likely to be? I mean, what standing will these reports have in this ongoing inquiry here?
Yes, well, important to remember there that many of the inquiries before Parliament, before the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises, also being admitted in terms the inquiry will deal with the evidence that was gathered through those processes. Also Home Affairs looking into the nationality of the Guptas, for example, and a pertinent question on how much of state capital has been spent on looking into this project of state capture and how much is still to be spent. Is this the country's most expensive PR exercise to date? We'll have to wait and see with 24 months for the inquiry to do its work. But certainly, Thulas, I thought interesting the advocate for former President Jacob Zuma saying they don't want to stall this process, they don't want to prove any hindrance to the process and the schedule of the inquiry moving forward. So interesting to hear that when you look at the behavior of former President Jacob Zuma in terms of litigation, and particularly in terms of his kind of dogged opposition to Public Protector then Thuli Madonsela's State of Capture report, all the way into the High Court toward the end of last year. And here today we hear a very different tone of message from from counsel for the former president.
Not forgetting, of course, Aaron, that this particular commission, as it stands, was appointed by the former president, Jacob Zuma. And you will remember, this was in January, just ahead of the ANC's January 8 statement. And at that particular point, he was even confidently saying that they've been calling for a commission of inquiry into state capture. I've announced it now. Let's see who, whether they'll be as keen to have it when it actually finally hits the ground running, perhaps suggesting that there'll be other people who may have their affairs exposed in a way that they would rather not have those affairs exposed. The terms of reference have been tweaked somewhat because, remember, there was that whole question about evidence that a person gives that implicates. It's one thing when a person implicates themselves, incriminates themselves, that's already, dealt with by the law, that, that evidence cannot be used against you in prosecution later. But there was this question about what happens when a person implicates person B in wrongdoing. So this is a process that is likely to feed into further processes, including possible prosecutions.
Yes, and I think that's exactly why we had all of these lawyers presenting themselves to Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo today and to the Commission and saying, we're here, we have an appetite for cross-examination, we want adequate time to make representations and also to consult with our clients. Hearing, for example, that former President Jacob Zuma has had 3 rounds of paperwork from the inquiry over being implicated in allegations by other witnesses, and that they need adequate time. It does raise the question, hearing that the first of those letters came on the 6th of August, whether there may be an argument for prejudice. Have these parties who want to make representations and are so eager for cross-examination, has there been prejudice in terms of how much time they've received?
So just a quick one then, Aaron, just a final note on the cross-examination. If you're dealing with so many people that are likely to be implicated, let's take, for example, Mcebisi Jonas comes and gives his evidence and starts naming people. Each and every one of those representatives of those people that he implicates are likely to apply for the right to cross-examine. But very quickly, my question, Matebula, what is your expectation? Partly this whole process is founded on the Constitution and other laws, but among those other laws is the Public Finance Management Act, isn't it?
Yes, and so hopefully tomorrow from Matebula we're here around procurement. So looking into tomorrow's proceedings following today, which I've said is rather dull, you have a more forgiving sort of attitude. You're an optimist. But I do think that Matebula again will be fairly slow in terms of getting to the fireworks that maybe many members of the public had expected from this inquiry. If there is an order on cross-examination, we're likely to see the kind of contest happening before Zondo and the inquiry. But in terms of tomorrow, if we look at Matebula, it's much likely to be about process, about procurement, and around any allegations of flouting the Public Finance Act in terms of those procedures.
All right, thank you so much, Erin. I'll see you tomorrow. Jeremy, as you hear, tomorrow we do expect that first witness, Willie Matebula from Treasury, who has acted in the position of Chief Procurement Officer, will probably give light in as far as the question of whether there was flouting of procurement processes, which can, be classified as corruption, but not just corruption, as we heard from the Commission a bit earlier on today, the legal team saying that corruption, instances of corruption on their own are one thing, but systematic corruption where there was a repurposing of processes of the state, of institutions of the state, and also a usurping of powers of constitutional.
All right, we seem to have lost that audio link to Tulas Sizwe Simelane, but Tulas, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. As Tulas and Erin were telling us, proceedings then get underway tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock in Parktown.